Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Real Divorce Talk San Diego. My name is Lynn Waldman. I'm a therapist and divorce coach. It's my job to help folks navigate the difficult emotions of divorce. I'm joined by my co-host, Shawn Skillin, who's a family law attorney, and Mark Hill, a certified divorce financial analyst. And please introduce yourselves to our audience.
I'm Shawn Skillin, family law attorney. I specialize in mediation and collaborative divorce. My job is to help you resolve all of your issues through this difficult transition and keep you out of court.
And I'm Mark Hill with Pacific Divorce Management. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst and a CFP, certified financial planner. I specialize in the financial aspects of divorce, and like Shawn and Lynn over here, my preference is for alternative dispute resolution rather than fighting it out in court.
And today our topics are kids, taxes, and business deductions. We would love to hear from you guys. Please feel free to write in with questions. Hopefully we'll have some really good answers.
So Lynn, you were going to start us off today.
Yes.
When people don't come up with their parenting plan, their custody agreements between themselves, they have to go to court and have the court help them work that out. You used to work in family court services down at the family courthouse, so can you explain to our viewers what actually happens with custody and visitation if you have to have the court help you figure that out?
Yes, so when parents are unable to work out their own parenting plan, they can be mandated by the court to go to family court services. And the reason why it's always better to be able to work it out on your own is because somebody who doesn't know you at family court services could be making a recommendation about how you're going to share your children. So for every mediation session, clients are allotted about 4 hours, but they don't get those whole 4 hours to talk about their kids or their parenting plan. They might get an hour and a half if they get that much time, and it goes by very quickly and very succinctly, so you kind of have to know what your proposals are and what concerns you have with your co-parent.
So it sounds like their lawyers would file a motion in court saying that we need help with custody and visitation. Then they get mandated to come into family court services, and who do they meet with in family court services? Who are well, they really aren't mediators, right?
Right.
Because their job is to make a recommendation to the court if the parents can't agree. So who are the people that work in family court services?
Right. The people who work at family court services are mental health professionals. So they typically have a master's degree in social work, or they may have a master's degree in family therapy or counseling. They may be licensed professionals. They may not be licensed. They have to have at least 2 years experience. So as you can see, you could get a whole range of professionalism or expertise. So you never know who you're going to get at family court services. And these are your kids you're talking about, so you want to come up with the best parenting plan that you possibly could.
So how does this work? Would I be in a room with my soon-to-be ex-spouse? Would I have my lawyer with me? How does this work in this mediation practically?
So family court services is supposed to provide an environment that feels safe for parents to be able to talk about their concerns. So attorneys never ever go in the room with the clients. And it is typically mom and dad and the mediator. And as you were saying earlier, Shawn, mediator is a misnomer because it's not a true mediation. Because at the end of it, if the parents don't agree, there would be a recommendation to court. So it is mom and dad. The only time the parents are seen separately is if there's issues of domestic violence and one parent or the other doesn't feel safe or doesn't feel like they could say what they need to say with the other parent there.
So there's no legal kind of input during those sessions. I can't run out and talk to my lawyer and find out what would happen if the judge has to decide? Or?
Right, typically no. And they will be trying to get mom and dad to an agreement, but there's no, the lawyers are not involved. One of the things I do with clients is I like to help them prepare for family court services. So I will tell them the flow of the sessions and what questions they most likely will be asked so that they go in feeling like they've already experienced it once and it's not so unfamiliar or strange when they're asked these questions, or if it's going by very quickly, they'll be able to keep up with the pace and know what to expect.
So is there ever a time where you talk to the kids that are involved in the cases? Because I know parents are always saying, well, my children want to have a say in this or something like that. So under what circumstances, if ever, would a family court services counselor want to speak with the children?
Typically, they speak to the older kids, and when children are 14 and older, then what they say weighs a little bit heavier with court. It's considered their preference that the court wants to pay attention to. But certainly the family court counselor could speak with younger kids to get an idea of what's going on in the home. Are there concerns in the home they need to be aware of? So it is possible, but there's no hard and fast rules about when the children would be interviewed and when not.
What about other sources of information? Teachers, doctors, counselors, grandparents, things like that. Do counselors ever talk to people like that?
They could make collateral contacts, but typically not. And that's part of the issue with family court is they're trying to do it quickly because they have so many cases. They may talk with collateral contacts like a therapist, they may speak with the school, but they try to limit the number of collateral contacts that they have.
And if there's a recommendation that's made by the not mediator, whatever we want to call it,
Counselor,
the
let's call it
counselor.
Counselor.
Is that universally adopted by the judges? Do they ever change it, or how does that then work when you get in front of the judge?
You know, I've seen both things happen where the court will say, yes, this is a good recommendation, we're going to adopt it, and other times where, you know, the court, of course, has discretion to say, you know, I like this part of the recommendation, but this part doesn't really make sense, or there might be information that the family court counselor didn't have that the judge is now taking into consideration.
So the parents will get an opportunity to say, for example, my 13-year-old daughter refuses to go to dad's house. And they could have that conversation. Now the judge can make a decision, obviously, but would that come out in the next phase?
If it didn't come out during the family court counseling session and all of a sudden that's something new, that is something that certainly the judge would want to pay attention to. The judge could even decide at that point to, if the child wasn't interviewed, to have the child interviewed, and now there'll be an addendum to the original recommendation to take that
I know
in.
from my own personal experience, although it wasn't around child sharing, that I felt that my input in my divorce from hell was not taken into account at all. And so I can foresee a situation where I share this in the counselor session. My daughter, you know, refuses to go to mom's. She's got all these problems with the boyfriend or whatever. And then it's still recommended that it goes that way. So it was information that the counselor had. Do I get a chance to say to the judge, wait a minute, this was ignored? How does that work?
You could, and if you had an attorney, hopefully you could bring that up through the attorney. But we would want to have some way to resolve that issue. So if I was the FCS counselor, I would take that into consideration, and I might suggest conjoint therapy for mom and the child, or maybe they both need to be in their individual counseling, because really, and I think probably most counselors at Family Court Services would think that the child should have an opportunity to have a relationship with both parents. So we'd want to try to resolve that issue in some way through counseling or conjoint therapy.
Got it.
Yeah, and I will say I get asked the question all the time about, you know, why can't my child choose? My kid's 10, my kid's 12, how old do they have to be before they can choose? And so the law was changed a few years ago to say that kids that are 14 years and older can be heard if they want to be heard. What people hear from that is that they get to choose, and it really isn't that they get to choose. It's that they have to be heard. So the court can have them interviewed by Family Court Services, the court could appoint them their own lawyer. Every once in a while a judge will interview a child themselves. So they have input, they still don't have decision-making power. And generally, as you said, the court views it that it's better for children to have a relationship with both parents. than to only have a relationship with one. And there can be, you know, all kinds of reasons why a kid doesn't want to see a particular parent
Yes.
at any given moment. So it sounds like counselors at Family Court Services are very time limited. They get 4 hours to meet with the parents, to review the file, to write their recommendation. Is there an alternative of working that out besides using Family Court Services counselors?
There is. People can choose to do private mediation. You could have private mediation with psychological testing. You can do private mediation without psych testing. And the benefit of that is the parents can meet with their counselor many more times. So there's more time to explain your situation, try to work out a parenting plan. Privately, that counselor could read many more declarations, take in much more information, interview the kids with both parents. So it's a little bit, well, it's actually much more thorough. But of course, it's expensive. You have to pay for that if it's private mediation. But some parents, I believe, have found that to be much more beneficial, and they feel more heard and understood, which I think is really the cornerstone of that kind of work, of doing mediation. People really want to feel heard and understood, regardless of whether or not the counselor agrees with them.
So as a financial guy, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking, well, decisions made around child sharing have an impact on child support.
Yes.
And so how does that get handled? Are these people qualified to explain what it might mean financially, the recommendations that they might be making to a judge?
That's a great question, because it does come up often with private mediation or at family court counseling. And it is completely out of the scope of a family court counselor. It's out of my scope. What we are looking at in private mediation or at family court services is what is the most child-centered plan for this child or children, regardless of who's paying for support, who has them on the health insurance. Nothing to do with money or payment or health insurance is considered in coming up with the child sharing plan, which I know is surprising to many people, but it's a whole different issue that would be handled by the court.
Okay, so it sounds like if they want to do the Family Court Services thing, they can do that. If they want to opt out of using their counselor, they can do their own private counselor. What happens in a divorce that's done through either mediation or collaborative divorce? How does custody and parenting get worked out that way?
So in mediation, like if a couple was working with you through mediation, of course they could work out their parenting plan with you. If it was a little bit more contentious, you could refer them privately to someone like me or someone else that does private mediation. And then regarding collaborative, the beauty of that is the family has a team. So they each have a divorce coach that would be helping them manage emotions. And what I really love about collaborative is that there's a child specialist just for the kids. So the kids definitely have a voice through that child specialist who's advocating for them, who's going to the meetings, who is the face and the voice of the children during the negotiations with spousal support, asset division, and just having that child specialist there who's met with the kids, has an understanding of where they are. It just brings that into the room.
And you have the resources at the table to be able to appreciate the legal and financial implications of what we're talking around children too. So you
Yes.
get that expertise right there at the table.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. As we've all experienced as collaborative professionals, it's just like looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, and I mean, I love the collaborative approach because having that child specialist sometimes is so important. And I know as a mediator, I usually only meet with the parents. I occasionally meet with children. But from way back in my litigation days when I used to do minors counsel work, and so I represented the children and talked to them all the time. The things that they were concerned about were usually not the things the parents thought they
Right.
were concerned about,
Yeah.
right? The parents thought they want to stay in their school, they want to stay in the house,
Yeah.
and the kids are telling me that they're worried about how dad's going to eat when mom's not there to cook, or they don't want the parents to fight about them. They'd like them both to be a lot more flexible and be able to be nice to each other.
Yes.
And things like that. So
Yeah.
I love that in the collaborative approach, the child specialist can not only evaluate where each kid's at from a developmental standpoint and give the parents some information to use, some real concrete stuff in terms of developing their parenting plans, but also tell them what the kids are really concerned about.
Yes.
Because
And that can be a difficult conversation sometimes.
I think it can be difficult, but I
Yeah.
think it's
Oh,
super
it's
important.
incredibly valuable, but I've had
Yeah.
cases where, well, the kids, then mum must keep the house because the kids want it. No, as you say, the kids just want you to stop fighting. They don't care where they live. you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
Yes.
anything feels like home to the kids, right? They have some of their stuff there, and they have you there as mom and dad, and that's what feels like home. But I just think that's a very nice resource to have in the collaborative case.
Yes. And that's what I've explained to parents. Wherever you are is going to be where their home is.
Yeah.
So, and I'd like to remind you guys, please feel free to call in with questions, write in with questions. We'd love to hear from you. And so, Shawn, you're going to talk to us a little bit today about taxes and the new tax law and how that's impacting divorce.
Yeah, so we touched on that last time. We talked about how Congress passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act back in December 2017. And the big important thing that affects us, well, one of them in divorce, is that starting January 1st, 2019, the tax deduction for spousal support will no longer exist for new orders that are entered into after the first of the year in new cases. So if you're already divorced and you already have your spousal support order, it's still going to be tax deductible. And if you go back to court to have that changed, to have it raised or lowered, you will continue to have that tax deduction. So that's not an issue. The issue is for anybody who's filed this year who may not be done this year. And we talked last month about if you're thinking about getting divorced, trying to get your divorce filed and get the 6-month waiting period started ticking before June 30th. Well, this continues to just be such a big topic in the media. It was even on NPR last week. Everybody's talking about this issue, and some people are very concerned about it. So I just wanted to kind of follow up this month by saying that if you miss that June 30th filing deadline, it's probably still not too late. You can go ahead and file. We can talk about either doing a legal separation or entering a partial judgment on spousal support. And this only applies to spousal support. Child support was never a tax deduction. And then we can, if you go and you talk to an attorney or a financial person like Mark, they can run some support numbers for you to see if having that tax deduction is really a big deal. Because the other issue is that if you're for filing your taxes for 2018, whether you file married, joint, or married separate, or you file singly, they're going to look at your marital status as of December 31st, 2018. And if you're still married on that date, you can file married, joint, or married separate. If you're divorced on that date, trying to preserve your tax deduction for the spousal support, then you've lost your opportunity to file married, joint, or married separate. And so for some of my clients, that's a big deal because they really want to file jointly this year. It's going to save them a lot of money, and they don't care about giving up the spousal support tax deduction because that's not going to save them as much money even over time. So the point of the whole thing is it's not too late. There are still things that you can do. You need to evaluate whether or not it's a big deal for you and your particular family, how much money it could save you or not. And then so talk to your tax accountant, talk to a family law attorney, get some numbers run, and just know that there still are alternatives out there for you to get that done. Spousal support is, and all kinds of support, as you've heard earlier, the child custody and parenting thing affects support. And spousal support is kind of a tricky thing to figure out. And so, Mark, we wanted you to talk today about tax deductions on your businesses. I always have clients that come in to see me and they own a small business, sometimes a big business. They deduct things on their tax returns to minimize their income they're paying taxes on. And then when we start running those support numbers and we tell them their income's really something much higher, they're not really very happy with that conversation.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about what you can deduct on your tax return that doesn't fly in family court, why that's all different.
And then it's very challenging because the way this works is that clients will come in and I ask to see 2 or 3 years of tax returns, and then we get into the difficult area of talking about support. And the view usually, let's give a scenario where you have a closely held business. One spouse works in the business, the other has never really worked in the business, but has always drawn a salary and always kind of had a, some kind of perks that have been received based upon the ownership of the business. They do a tax return every year. And on that tax return, they try to maximize what they can deduct. Perfectly legal to do so. It goes back to Judge Learned Hand in the 1920s, who said there is no patriotic duty to pay the maximum amount of tax. Anyone can organize their affairs in the way to pay the minimum, and that's perfectly legal. So people do that, but as you may have seen on odd occasion, some people stretch the truth a little bit further. And so we come up with numbers sometimes where we look at the gross income and then the net income, and the person will say, I have no money to pay support. Well, that's because you're running your groceries through the company, plus all your utility expenses and all these other things that, well, my accountant says it's fine. Well, your accountant's approach to this, and what may be, I would term, defensible in an IRS audit, is not necessarily what would be acceptable when it comes to family law. Because in family law we have rules about, and it's not just individuals who have their own businesses. If you are a highly compensated employee in a company and you get perks, you get a health club membership, you get these other things that are part of your job, guess what? That is also income available for support. So it's very challenging for people to kind of look at this in two different ways. And in litigated cases, I have seen battles over this plow through tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, fighting about what really the income is from a closely held business.
Because income is defined very broadly when it comes to child and spousal support.
Yeah.
It's basically anything.
Exactly,
Any kind of income,
or
whether it's
or a
stock
perk that can be
options,
considered
right,
to be
stock
an income.
options, a car allowance.
Exactly.
They pay for your cell phone.
Yeah.
You get money for travel or per diems or whatever. I mean, it's very broadly defined, and so there is some discretion with the court. But it's that challenge of going over those tax returns when people in their head think they make $30,000 a year, $20,000, or show a negative.
Yeah.
And then to try and tell them that, oh no, all that stuff is going to count as income and we're going to add it back, and sometimes we're going to add it back as non-taxable income.
Right. Yeah.
And so maybe you can talk a little bit about how
Well,
some of those things that you find.
The cell phone you alluded to is a great example of that. I asked the guy, do you have a cell phone? Of course I have a cell phone. Do you run it through the business? Yes, I do. What about your wife? Well, we put hers through too, but she's not working in the business. Right, well, my accountant said it was fine. And do the kids have iPads? Oh, yes. And are they on that account too? Yeah. So we've seen the extremes here. From absolutely, husband should be able to deduct his cell phone because guess what? He uses it 90% for business. Now the IRS would say you still have to put 10% that should go to personal, but the IRS is probably not going to get into any difficulty around that. Add in the wife's, probably okay. When you start adding minor children in for their iPads or cell phones for 12-year-olds, that's when it's an area where your accountants say, we can live with this, we can push that through. IRS is not going to bother with that. But when we're looking at how that works for family law, there's a pretty bright line there. That, yes, husband, yes, wife, possibly, but beyond that, no. And so then that money would be added back into the potential gross number we would use for support.
How do people reconcile that? How do they change their lifestyle to take all of that into consideration?
That's the challenge of divorce, is that two households cost more than one,
Yes.
and inevitably everyone suffers to some degree. It's the rare case where you can basically divide a marital estate, create two households, and both can maintain the same lifestyle. How often do we see that? It's rare. Even, yes, in the super wealthy, that is occasionally, it's not going to have an impact. But for 95% of our clients, it will have an impact. And so everyone's fighting at the margins because there's not going to be enough to go around. So there's this concept of scarcity that we get into where everyone feels like they're losing. Let me ask you a question. When someone asks you what your net worth is, do you divide by 2?
No.
No. What am I worth? I add up my house, my business, my retirement accounts, and that's my net worth. Actually, that's not my net worth. If I were to get divorced, it's half of that. So inevitably, when we start doing this stuff, it feels like a loss. Because darn it, I was worth 3 million, now I'm going to be worth 1.5, or I was worth 500,000, now I'm going to be worth 250. That doesn't feel good. So we're coming from this standpoint of everyone trying to hold on to as much as they can. And when we get into this concept where these are deductible for your business, but we're not going to be able to do that in the family law discussion, it feels unfair. And also, it's kind of adding on to the top of the basic unfairness that any business owner feels when they've run the business, they started it, yes, they had a spouse that supported them doing it, but now the spouse can get a 50% interest in the equity in that, plus they're going to get paid from support. That already feels like double dipping. And then when you start to increase the income available for support through changing the rules that they've gotten used to over the years, it can be very challenging and can cause a lot of friction.
And I've often heard people say, well, I should be able to live in the lifestyle to which I have become accustomed.
Right, yeah.
But what you're saying is that's just sometimes not reality, and maybe for most people it is.
For most people, it's not reality. In fact, I will say that on average, it takes people somewhere between 3 and 5 years to recover from divorce financially, if they ever do. Some never do, but generally it's 3 to 5 years, and you feel like you're back on your feet. You know.
I would say 3 to 5 years sounds pretty quick, actually, for someone to be able to recover.
I think all comes down to planning. I tend to see people who have planned, who kind of have an understanding of what their resources are and don't sort of wake up 5 years after the divorce and realize that they're having to tear up floorboards in the house to heat it because they're out of money, you know. So, I mean, there's no saying in my business, you know, nobody ever plans to fail, they just fail to plan. And that's something I think that we see happening around divorce, and especially when we get to the end of these contested divorces where people just so badly want to be done with it that often they'll just take whatever was the last thing on the table. And the consequences of that are not something they've really examined.
So when we're going back to this whole business deduction thing, some examples I think might be helpful for the viewers is what if you have a business, let's say it's a plumbing business, and you're looking at last year's income, and one of the things that comes up when you're going through the profit and loss statements is this, you know, $20,000 charge for a spa. And it turns out that the spa was installed in your own backyard. Is that going to get added back as income?
Gray areas. You know, gray areas. This is, don't want to attack our lawyers here, but the lawyers make an awful lot of money having discussions around things like this, you know, and again, you can probably talk to that better than I can. Would it be? Would it not be? You could argue both ways, couldn't you, Counselor?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are the things that happen all the time. I think, you know, I've had people where they write off their car expenses, you know, even though they have a truck that is the business truck, like they own a plumbing business or they own an electrical business, and so they have, you know, vans and trucks and things that they drive, but they write off their personal vehicle and maybe their spouse's personal vehicle, and maybe their partner does the same thing. And so there's a lot of that stuff. I've had people that run absolutely all of their expenses, their rent, like you said, their food, their groceries, their cell phones, their gas bills, their Costco. I mean, everything runs through the business. They don't have a business account and a personal checking account. Personally, I think I'd have a heart attack if I was doing it that way. But I mean, I have people that do that, very smart professionals, and they have accountants sometimes that advise them to do that. So when they come in and you're having to sort through this, it's very difficult. And you have to go back and get tax returns, and you have to have them run these profit and losses, and sometimes you have to look at the debit card and the credit cards, and you're tracking all of this stuff, and it gets very expensive, number one, to do all this kind of forensic accounting to try and figure out exactly what the income is. And then normally, we're going back 3 or 5 years because sometimes the income has really varied. It's been high one year, low one year, it's good this year, or maybe in between. And so it gets so expensive.
And it becomes so contentious. Because
It
this
does.
is the thing. If you are going to go through every line of expenses that have been written off on a business, it's the potential to argue about something. Let's have a case right now where husband is the business owner, works in the business, wife worked there, no longer works there. Continuing education for his profession. Okay, he deducts those trips. Well, he's a golfer too, so he always takes a few extra days, and recently he's been taking his girlfriend with him on these trips. And so,
Don't get me started.
so these are being deducted. Okay, he's got a valid business reason. I always went for my continuing ed to Denver at this time of the year, or did it every time, and we always would go, and then I'd play golf a few days. Why is anything different? I want to deduct that whole thing. It's an argument we can have at every line item, which is why it's so much better to do it in an environment where you can actually sit around a table and say, guys, what do you want to do about this? How granular do you want to get? Do you want me to go through this and come up with some ballparks here? This is what I think is reasonable. This is what I've seen in the past. Or do you literally want to go through every line? Because that's the choice we can make when we do it in alternative dispute resolution. But if we get in front of a judge, what's the judge going to do? What would a judge do if we can't agree on anything on this? How would they
the
approach
judge
it?
is going to appoint an expert.
Right.
The judge is going to appoint a forensic who's going to go through it line by line by line, and you're going to have to agree on the expert. You're probably going to share the cost in some way. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to cost a boatload of money to figure it out. And so I think it's always better when you have. The more complicated it is, I think the better it is to keep it out of court. And you can still involve experts, but you can control what you want the experts to look at and how much you want to spend on the experts. You can use a joint expert. Otherwise, sometimes the litigation, you have battling experts.
Dueling experts, right?
So husband has an expert, wife has an expert. They don't agree, so then the court has to appoint a third expert to give them feedback about the two experts. And so now you've got three experts looking at your tax returns instead of one that you agree on. And I think that's what's nice about a collaborative case or a mediation case. The professionals can sit down with the parties and they can kind of say, this is what matters to us most, and this is what we need to look at. We only need to look at the last 2 months of bank statements, or we only need to look at the last year of bank statements. We don't have to go back 7 years. And it really does help to manage the cost.
And then the decision making is kept between the parents, really, because they're in charge of the case.
Yeah.
Instead of
and it's
the courts.
confidential also. And many clients who have an individual business don't necessarily want any court looking at their books and going back years
And some
about
of that
what they
ends
did.
up being part of the public record.
Exactly,
So if you want to
yeah.
get an IRS audit and have a bunch of stuff for them to look at, have all these documents as
Yeah.
part of your public record, or have court
In your
transcripts
divorce,
in your divorce that the IRS can go back and look at.
So even if it's contentious and parents are disagreeing in the collaborative process, we can work that out.
They can choose how they want to approach it in a way that the courts don't allow you that choice. Yes, you can even within the collaborative process, you can have differing opinions about what should be included and what should not be included. And you don't have, it's not kumbaya. We're not roasting marshmallows around the table here. This is very much something that we do in a way that represents both parties. It's not as if one party can come in and say, hey, this is the way it's going to be. It's a conversation, and it can become contentious, but that's what divorce is. I mean, as I say, people wouldn't be getting divorced if they agreed about everything.
Yes, but it's not that same win-lose that you would get in a litigated divorce.
Yes, often I've heard that when judges are faced with some issues, they have to decide black or white. And they don't have a choice. If you put it in front of them, they must decide black or white. Some ownership issues, for example, of contested assets. When you do this, when you're in front of a collaborative team, we can be as gray as you want. We can do anything that works for you and will work, more importantly, for your reformed family. And that's the beauty of it, in my opinion, is that especially if you have children, you will have a relationship with this person probably for the rest of your life in some form or another.
Yeah.
And the way that you divorce will have a greater impact on your future relationship than anything you can imagine.
Yes, and that's one of the things we say in Collaborative is once you've decided to divorce, the next most important question is how?
Right.
How do you go about getting divorced?
Yeah.
What do you want the story to be?
That's right, because your kids will talk about that story for a long time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they
I mean,
may
I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but my parents were divorced when we were 3, 4, and 5 years old. I have cousins who are basically our same age that were divorced, and when we get together at big family parties, that still comes up, and we're talking decades later.
Yeah.
So it really is a story that your kids will tell going forward. It will affect them going forward, and so, you know, please, 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 if you are thinking about divorce, if you're in the middle of a divorce, considering going to our divorce options workshop, which is the first Saturday of every month. The next one's coming up the first Saturday of August. I think that is August 4th. It's from 9 to 12 every time, and it's in Carmel Valley at 11622 El Camino Real. It's right in the building right next to the Ruth Chris Steakhouse. You can call 858-472-4022. To register, or you can send us an email at sandiegoddivorceoptions@gmail.com, or go to the collaborative familylawsandiego.com, which is our website, and click on the divorce options tab. You can also Google any of us and look us up online and give our offices a call, and we'll be happy to hook you up with all the information on divorce options. So it's an open workshop presented by 3 people like us. It's not always necessarily us, but there's a lawyer, a therapist, and a financial person there. And we just talk about your options on how to get divorced. We're going to talk about litigation. We'll talk about collaborative. We'll talk about mediation. We'll talk about doing it yourself, and kind of give you some advantages and disadvantages. And you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions of people live and in person instead of just on Facebook. I want to take the time to thank our viewers today. We've had quite a few live viewers online, on and off. Didn't get any questions from you today, but thanks for joining in. And be sure that you come back and join us on Tuesday, August 14th, again at 1 o'clock. We'd also like to encourage you to go to our Facebook page and post any questions or topics that you'd like to have us address in the future, or any guests that you'd like to see on talking about other things that we don't always cover. Anything else you guys have to say about today?
No, please do come up with things you'd like us to discuss in the future, though, because we really do want to know what your interests are.
Great, and I look forward to seeing some new people at our next divorce options workshop. Happy to answer questions.
See y'all on August 14th.